Okay, so this is the part 3 on a pictorial biography of Sakyamuni Buddha. Every one of these Indian people knew that everything they needed came from the soil, and therefore they considered the tilling of the soil and the producing of food as their most important work, labor which would benefit the country as well as themselves. Hence, a yearly practice was observed in which the king and his ministers all went to the fields in person to take part in tilling and ploughing ceremony at sea sowing time in order to set an example for the people, showing them that ploughing the soil and growing crops was not demeaning work, but was on the contrary a very glorious work that one could do. In Kapilavastu, the end of summer marked the season for the farmers to start tilling. King Suddhodana and his officials customarily led the royal tiller festival outside the city. Every year, this was a big ceremony. The people of the city all came out to see the king ploughing the land and to enjoy the very colorful feast. On this day also, Prince Siddhartha accompanied King Suddhodana to the ceremony. The king began the ceremony in the field. He raised a gold, beautifully decorated plough and began to plough the land. A group of officials followed him, ploughing the land with silver decorated ploughs. Finally, there came the farmers, two in a row, using their own ploughs. The stiff brown mud was loosened and was then ready for seeding. At lunchtime, the attendants of Prince Siddhartha all went to enjoy the feast, leaving the prince alone. So Prince Siddhartha walked by himself to the shade of thriving jambu tree, sat down, quietly calmed his mind by expelling all its wrong thoughts, and began to contemplate. The king, the officials, and the farmers are here to hold the royal tiller ceremony, and now they are happily feasting. But those oxen did not seem to be happy at all. They had to exert a force greater than their physical strength to pull the ploughs and to break the hard earth. They toiled so much that they could not stop panting. Obviously, they were not happy. While the people here were enjoying themselves today, they all had to do hard work, and if occasionally they were to do something not quite up to the master's expectations, harsh threats and merciless whips would fall on them. The prince also noticed the activities of various other creatures around him. He saw a lizard which was crawling out from a crevice in the earth, catching and eating working ants with its tongue. Shortly afterwards, a snake approached, killed the lizard by biting through its head, and swallowed it. Just at this moment, the prince was astonished to see a hawk suddenly descend from the sky, seize the snake, tear it apart, and eat it. Siddhartha again went into deeper thought and began to question himself. Thus, if things are like that, then it is not the case that that which is said to be beautiful in life will also certainly hide ugliness behind its back. At last, the prince came to realize that although he was very happy, now there was, however, a kind of most great suffering that was always covering mankind and all beings. At the time, Prince Siddhartha was still young. He was able to have such profound thoughts and to attain to the state of non differentiation regarding all things and enter into the first dhyana. When the royal tiller ceremony and the feast were over, the attendants began to think of the prince. They rushed back to him and found the prince sitting motionless under the jambu tree like a stone statue. They awakened him and told him that the king was looking for him, for it was time to go home. On the way, Prince Siddhartha was filled with compassion for all creatures because every single creature, in the course of keeping itself alive, has to struggle constantly against pain and suffering. Knowing that the prince had thought of seeking ultimate truth troubled King Suddhodana, he feared that if such thoughts were not eliminated, the prince probably would soon leave him and abandon the country, and then there would be no one to inherit the throne. He felt that the only way to change the prince's mind was to double the joy and pleasure available to him in the royal palace. To achieve this end, his first plan was to construct three splendid new palaces. The first palace was built of fragrant wood. Inside the air was warm, and everything was designed for maximum comfort. This was the prince's winter palace. The second was the prince's summer palace, which was built of polished marble. The third palace, built of brick, had a green tiled roof. This was the prince's lodge in the monsoon season. King Suddhodana also ordered that a beautiful garden be built around the three palaces, which was to have many ponds containing lotus plants of various colors. Thus the prince could take a walk or a horseback ride or do whatever he enjoyed the most. The years went by very quickly, and Prince Siddhartha had now become a young man. All the material pleasures the king had bestowed on him turned out to be valueless to the contemplative prince. The king had thought that his actions would make the prince happy, but everything proved to be in vain. He then summoned his ministers to a meeting, asking them if there were any other means to prevent the prince from abandoning his position as a potential leader of the country to become a religious teacher. As the old sage Sita had predicted, the officials offered their opinion. The best way to hold the prince is to seek out the most beautiful girl in the land and have the prince get married to her. Once the prince has experienced the sweetness of married life, he will choose nothing else. Then he will follow your intention and take over the throne in the future. The king considered the suggestion offered by ministers as all right. Then he ordered that the selection of the most beautiful girl in the country to take place. On the particular day decreed for the selection, all candidates had to come to the city of Kapilavastu. Each of them was required to walk in front of the prince and would receive a present from him. The king also ordered a group of highly intelligent officials to be stationed in the place where the beautiful girls were to pass before the prince. Their duty was to observe carefully which girl the prince liked the best. On the day of the beauty contest, candidates from all over the country passed, one after the another, in front of the prince. They were all beautiful. Each of them received a present directly from the hand of the prince. The girls were all very happy and felt honored to accept a present from the prince. However, when they returned to their groups, they all began to fear that they might not be pretty enough. For they felt that Prince Siddhartha was unlike other young men. He had not paid attention to their beauty at all. Indeed, the prince had handed a present to each of the girls, but his mind all the time appeared to be centered on some other thing, which was much more important than the smiling appearances and beautiful and voluptuous bodily movements of the girls. And that was why some of the girls said that when the prince had handed them presents, they felt that he was not an ordinary human being at all, but on the contrary, that he was a celestial being. The line of the girls had almost come to an end, and the presents were all given away. The prince still sat calmly thinking about other things. Everyone thought that the last contestant had come before the prince and received her present, but suddenly a beautiful girl entered hastily, for she had arrived late. When the girl entered, the observers noticed that the prince was somewhat astonished, like the other girls had done. She also walked before the prince, bashfully with bowed head, but after she had passed by, she looked back smilingly and asked, "Any present for me?" The prince replied, "I'm really sorry, but all the presents are gone. However, you may have this." And he took from his neck an exquisite golden chain and wound it about the girl's arm. The officials who were ordered by the king to observe were very happy to see this. They discovered that the girl who had entered last was Yashodhara, the daughter of King Supabuddha. They reported this to King Suddhodana, who sent his minister to visit King Supabuddha, proposing that Princess Yasodhara marry Prince Siddhartha. The people at the foot of the Himalayas were sturdy and brave. Thus, according to the custom of Sakya clan, when a young prince was about to marry, he had to demonstrate to the public that he was a clever man. and as well versed in horseback riding, archery, and fencing as the other brave young men were. Respecting this custom, Prince Siddhartha openly invited all the clever and brave youths of the country to a contest of skill at Kapilavastu. Every one of these youths was an expert horseman, archer, and fencer. Each young man in turn demonstrated his skills in front of the king. His officials and the people, Prince Siddhartha also participated in the contest, riding his white horse, Kantaka, and he turned out to be the most skillful of all the youths. In archery, Prince Siddhartha shot farther than his cousin Prince Devadatta, who was regarded by all as the best archer in the country. As a swordsman, Prince Siddhartha was able to cut down a tree with one stroke. After he had struck the tree remained standing, so that witnesses thought the prince had missed. But when the wind began to blow, the tree toppled slowly down, for the prince had sliced through the tree with no trace. The blade of the sword had passed through the tree as if it had cut through cream. In the fencing contest, the prince was also the victor with honor. Before that, his stepbrother Prince Nanda was generally recognized as the top sportsman. Next came the horse racing contest. Prince Siddhartha's white horse Kantaka ran so fast that the other racers were left far behind. So, the other contestants complained the prince wins so easily just because he has fastest horse. Anyone riding Kantaka would win first place. On the contrary, if someone were to race that rarely mounted queer black horse, then whoever the rider might be would surely be the loser. So they exchanged their horses, everyone trying in turn to mount that fierce, haughty black horse. But it threw everyone to the ground. It was now Prince Aniruddha's turn to try, and being the best rider in the country, he mounted the black horse with only a slight effort, and then he whipped it hard to force it to run around the yard. However, Prince Aniruddha stayed in place for only a moment, for unexpectedly the fierce untamed horse reared, turned its head, and caught the prince's leg in its mouth and threw him from its back to the ground. If the yard guards had hesitated in going to help him or remained behind the horse without beating it, the wild animal would unquestionably have killed Prince Aniruddha. Now it was Prince Siddhartha's turn to mount. Everybody felt that if even Prince Aniruddha, the best rider in the country, had been thrown and almost killed, Prince Siddhartha could probably do no better. But Prince Siddhartha approached the horse lightly and put one hand on its neck while rubbing its nose with his other hand, at the same time softly murmuring a few words and then tapping the horse on the sides of its body. Everybody was quite surprised that the fierce black horse had really calmed down, gently letting the prince ride him, obediently moving forward and backwards as the prince directed. The people who were gathered there clearly saw that the horse was acting completely according to the prince's will. It was the first time that any person had ever dared to come close to this proud horse and tame it without a whip. Finally, everyone agreed that Prince Siddhartha was the best rider in the country and most qualified to be Princess Yashodhara's husband. And the king Supabuddha was also very pleased to give the hand of his beloved daughter to the young courageous Prince Siddhartha in marriage. The wedding of Princess Yashodhara to Prince Siddhartha was an event in which the whole country rejoiced. The young couple lived in a palace that King Suddhodana had specially built for them, one which contained all kinds of splendid accommodations designed for the sole purpose of giving them comfort, satisfaction, and pleasure. Now King Suddhodana began to feel relaxed, feeling assured that the prince would no longer think about leaving home. In order to prevent the prince from thinking of leaving home or of other things, King Suddhodana ordered that no one should ever mention in front of the prince anything having to do with misery or unhappiness, such as old age, sickness, death, etc. The attendants of the prince were ordered to constantly provide songs, dances, and music, and never to appear tired before him. In addition to this, the king ordered the construction of high walls all around the palace and gardens where the prince lived. Only young and beautiful girls were allowed to enter into the gardens and palace from beyond the walls. Should someone within the walls accidentally fall and injure themselves, the person had to be taken out immediately and could not return before complete recovery. The gates of the garden were closely guarded to prevent the prince from going outside for any reason except with king's permission. Although King Suddhodana had a selected group of attendants for the prince and tried in every way to keep his son from experiencing anything unpleasant in his life, the prince was not as happy as his father had hoped. The prince eagerly desired to see other joyful things of the world, things that were beyond the palace walls. The prince also wanted to know what the life of the people, other than that of the sons of kings and their high officials, was like. Time and time again, the prince pleaded with his father, informing him that he would never be happy unless he could see the outside world. Unable to refuse the persistent demand of the prince to travel outside the palace, King Suddhodana finally consented. He ordered that on the day of the prince's outing, every house must be cleaned, painted, and decorated with flags and flowers. Along the way, no one was allowed to be seen working, and blind, sick old men, and leprous persons had to stay home until the carriage of the prince had passed. Enough for today. Good night.